Is the hidden job market a myth or not? That is the question we are going to be answering in today's special episode. Welcome, my name is Jesse, and I'm an employment specialist. Before we start, all of the links to our research is going to be in the video description below in a separate document. This is because the number of links that we have exceed the amount of characters allotted by YouTube. Also, you can check out the link to the much larger article in the video description below. And just a quick reminder that these are historical documents and should be considered within their appropriate timelines. So some of the terminology that will be used is not the same that we would use today. Many people have given the analogy that the hidden job market is like an iceberg, and that's because the traditional view is that more jobs are hidden than not, but has recently been called a myth by critics. A quick Google search will provide many examples. Some call the whole thing a myth. Others call it a misquote that's gotten out of hand, and some people say it's a misrepresentation of a sociology paper on weak ties from the 1970s and 80s. The issue seems to be around this 80% statistic, which people are calling a myth. But what is the truth? And where did the idea of hidden jobs even come from? Can the hidden job market stand up to scrutiny? Or will we find that it's actually a much smaller number? To find out, we will have to go back in time to uncover the hidden origins of the hidden job market. The year was 1950, and juvenile delinquency was rampant in Iowa. Miss Myrtle Hubbard, a school teacher, was having a conversation with a parent about a student named Freddie, who had tried all of the traditional job search means to get a summer job. Because of the lack of industry in Iowa, there were actually very few opportunities for summer jobs. Miss Hubbard, being the chairman of the local women's association, held a meeting to find out if other youth were experiencing the same issue. 479 youth showed up, all looking for work. The Women's Association promised that they would get every single job seeker who showed up to that meeting a job. They launched the Teen-Ager Employment Services Project to accomplish this. The members of the Women's Association approached their husbands and networked into the local Chamber of Commerce, the mayor's office, and engaged 250 employers. But the best part was an idea suggested by the teenagers themselves, that they should develop a training manual, kind of like Army basic training, but for job seekers. The program was called How to Win Jobs and Influence Bosses. By September 1951, 887 teenagers had found work. News articles would go on to remark about the graduates from this program. Quote, "Teenagers, the whole town, all on the hunt for hidden jobs that might be overlooked." It didn't take long for the idea of hidden jobs to spread. The project story appeared in the 1953 May edition of Reader's Digest. The title was "These Teen-Agers Get Summer Jobs." Soon the teenager program was flooded with requests for information. So they shared their training materials, which spread as far away as Palm Beach to California. I'm going to stop here for a minute and build a case on why I think this is the start of hidden jobs as a concept. For starters, this is the first time we actually see the word hidden jobs used in a job search context. And it's also in quotations and in the context of people who graduated from this program. So we know that they were using it as a proper term. While the training booklet that they were using seems to be lost to time, we actually know a fair amount about it from secondary sources. The idea came from teenagers. We know that local business owners and teenagers both had a hand in content development. We know that the language of this booklet was rather unique, written in, quote, teenager talk. We also know some of the components that were put into this program from instructional videos. And we know that there was a focus on soft skills, mainly initiative and cooperation, two skills that are both essential for networking. Graduates of the program not only went on to look for hidden jobs, but they would build business cases for why they should get hired by a particular employer. An example of this is a woman who went to two real estate agents and made a business case that she should be hired under them as a secretary to man the office while they were out showing houses. The business case that she made was they were losing money because no one was there to greet potential buyers or sellers at the office because it was closed. Again, we know that there was a general lack of opportunity and that traditional job search methods at the time, which was just showing up to apply, were not working well. So a new approach and a creative approach was necessary to change that. And we know that this program was wildly successful right from the start. This is already a strong case already, but I'm going to add one more final point, which is purely speculation. One cannot help but look at the title of the program, How to Win Jobs and Influence Bosses, and not immediately think of Dale Carnegie's work, How to Win Friends and Influence People. One would expect that some of the content in this document was probably influenced by Dale Carnegie's work, especially when you realize that Dale Carnegie talked a lot about hidden powers, possibilities, and treasures in his work. But again, this is purely speculative, and we would actually need to talk to someone or see the actual training document to have a much more complete understanding of this. After the training documents had gone out to various states, the term hidden jobs seems to have been adopted rather quickly, mainly by disability employment professionals, as part of a business case for having better occupational information. In the 1956 article, A New Aid for Counseling and Selective Placement reads the following: urgently needed a comprehensive and well-organized fund of occupational information which goes well beyond the limits of their personal knowledge, meaning the placement specialists, and even further beyond the limits of their local files of existing opportunities. Few of us are familiar with all the occupations in our particular area of operation. The so-called hidden jobs exist in surprising numbers, end quote. The full term hidden jobs market appears for the first time in December 1962 in a job ad in the Sunday Herald, and it reads the following: see what the hidden market has to offer. You will remain anonymous when you apply for better paying jobs through James C. Synergen. Wait a second. This is a job ad. So the first time the words hidden jobs and market ever appear together are in the context of a job ad from a recruitment agency. And this is not a one-off either. We found multiple examples after this point. So recruitment agencies generally use this term. So it follows that a myth that we believe today about the hidden job market means there's no ads. So clearly, that's not its definition. This makes sense when you think about it. Recruitment agencies rarely ever tell you who their employer is. And sometimes they'll post for one job like general labor, and they're actually hiring for multiple companies. The same can be said for employment service providers like myself, educational programs, co-op departments, and internships. You don't necessarily know who the employer is unless they specifically tell you. So if these are part of the hidden job market, suddenly that 80% statistic doesn't seem all that unrealistic. Or maybe, because it seems to have a different definition, it's a completely different concept entirely. Let's find out. Bernard Halden first used the 80% statistic in an article about job seeker development from August 1966. So at this point, it's not connected at all to the hidden job market as a job search term, but rather just referring to job openings in general. He says, we consistently remind him, speaking of the job seeker, that according to a Ford Foundation survey, 80% of existing job openings are hidden and never show up on employment offices or wanted ad listings. What Ford Foundation survey is he referring to? Well, it is the pilot project conducted by the National Industrial conference board to gather labor market information from businesses, which is being done in Rochester, New York. The results which came out the very same year. We know that this is the original survey for that statistic, as this is the pilot project, and literature from the 1965 Proceedings on Interstate Conference and Labor Statistics, that's a mouthful, states that this survey is of great interest before launching a more larger national survey. So up to this point, no one has collected data from employers before. Therefore, there can be no other surveys that this quote could possibly be referring to. Before we go any further, let's just take a quick gander at some of the hiring channels that they surveyed. So they looked at private employment agencies. They looked at the Rochester Machine Industrial Placement Service. They looked at executive search organizations, state employment agencies, schools, unions, associations, as well as walk-ins, contacts, and employee referrals. One thing to note about the numbers that you see listed is they don't add up to 100%, and that's because sometimes the employer would advertise a single position in multiple channels. In the report, they compared job vacancies, hires, sources of candidates, and job postings. Basically, what they were testing to see was if postings in the newspaper was a predictable metric for collecting labor market information. It was not. They found that only 25% of jobs were ever listed in the newspaper. And of those, service jobs were the highest percentage, almost 85%. Of the total service jobs. But if you consider that Mr. Halden is only talking about career type roles and not jobs in general, we can't count the 25% overall number. When you consider that you have to exclude the service jobs and the unskilled labor jobs, then the average drops to 19% advertised in the newspaper. Thus, you get 80% of jobs not advertised in the newspaper, right? Well, not exactly. There are several critical issues with this number, but it does require some explanation. Seems Mr. Halden used a similar figure before 1966, but it was in the context of an estimate of 80% of jobs are filled by personal recommendation, which is very different than saying that jobs are not advertised at all. We know from Chris Miner's book that came out in 1963, book titled How to Get an Executive Job After 40, that there may have been some disagreement even about that figure. Mr. Halden, in his book, How to Make a Habit of Success, which came out in 1960, goes into greater detail, stating that the statistic is about jobs with a salary of $600 a month or more, which would be about $6,040 by today's standards. The exact breakdown is 80% higher from personal recommendations, 15% higher from newspaper ads, 5% higher from employment agencies. And this is where we get that 85% statistic are not advertised in the newspaper. Interesting. Basically, Mr. Halden was already invested in this number prior to the Ford Foundation survey that came out later on. He just used that survey to support his conclusions. But there's a huge problem. If you read the actual survey on page 12, it says the following. In Rochester, one would not expect a close relationship between the Help Wanted Index and job vacancies because the larger employers mostly engaged in manufacturing are affiliated with the Industrial Management Council, which requests its members not to advertise for employees in the Rochester newspaper. In other words, that 80% statistic is debunked. Sorry, Mr. Halden, it just doesn't work. Outside of Rochester, New York, we just can't say 80% of jobs. We just can't because it's artificially low. Sorry. But now the question is how did this statistic become the definition of the hidden job market? Well, We've seen the good side of the hidden job market. We've seen this part, which is the bad part of the hidden job market. Now it's time for the ugly part of the hidden job market. Enter into the picture Mr. Richard Irish, a mentee of Mr. Heldon, an executive recruiter for Transcentra Corp, and his book, Go Hire Yourself an Employer. Great name for a book, by the way. This seems to be where the percentage and the hidden job market become one and the same. I am using some secondary sources here from the same year, as I could only find the revised version and not the original 1973 version. Anyways, Mr. Irish claims that 80% of the country's judgment jobs, judgment in this context means management or decision maker jobs, again, high-paying jobs, are filled through an old boys network, a system of referrals closed to anyone pounding the pavement. Most employers fear quite stupidly the unwashed masses, end quote. I find this a very interesting statement, considering the survey in which he's quoting doesn't differentiate between walk-ins and contacts. Just putting that out there. On page 79, Mr. Irish writes, "These are the jobs which exist in the minds of those few people who make a place work. They have power and make decisions. Don't look for any prepackaged job descriptions. Most operating people don't have time for such nonsense." End quote. But hey, the caliber of this book is not particularly good. In fact, the article in which I'm quoting for is written by Ellen Hume, who criticizes the book, saying, "The ins and outs of the hidden job market are outlined in Irish's slim little volume, Go Hire Yourself an Employer. Much of it is hogwash and would enrage anyone who isn't white, male, and worshipful of the Ivy League." Hogwash, indeed. The book is filled with bad career advice, such as, don't thank your employer for a job, it's purely a business transaction. And his advice on how to beat the job search blaz is just epic, such as, spend money on yourself, even if you go into debt. Avoid other job seekers because they'll depress you. Start an affair. And my personal favorite, stay away from government programs. They are staffed by people who can't find a job. Clearly, a far cry from the teenager program that started the concept that Mr. Irish is now claiming to be an expert in. Going forward, we see an explosion of claims of different people claiming how you can access the 80% of hidden jobs, to the point where the author of What Color Is Your Parachute states the following in his 1977 book. Heavens knows there's enough insiders who have said in print that this hidden job market is what the job hunter ought to be aiming at, end quote. He does go on and make a little bit more of a case that if someone walked through your door and was an expert in some of the challenges that you were experiencing as a business, of course you would probably go and hire them. In fact, you might actually be thinking about creating a new position anyway. Anyways, over the next 40 years, the hidden job market would become the subject of countless news articles, books, and quoted by new generations completely divorced of its original context. Let's see if we can change that. To start, we are going to need a clearer definition that honors the original concept. Here is how I would now define the hidden job market: as jobs/opportunities that are marketed or discovered through contacts, networks, or agencies completely independent of formal ads or postings. These could include created jobs, not advertised jobs, pending jobs, internal jobs, employee referrals, or jobs from third parties, such as employment service providers, recruiters, staffing firms, unions, schools, trade programs, associations, and anything similar. In a nutshell, these are opportunities that are hidden because you need to talk to people within your network in order to discover them. We should also be using more recent and, quite frankly, cleaner statistics. And CERIC's National Business Survey, Canadian study, that was just conducted in 2021 is a good place to start. And we already see elements of the hidden job market in comparable numbers, except that it doesn't include job boards at all. Not sure why that's not on their list. Doesn't seem to have been asked. Not sure why. Anyways, we see that employee referrals are still one of the top methods for hiring skilled labor. So getting to know someone from your dream company is still one of the best ways to access the hidden job market. Strategies could include informational interviews, networking events, or mentorship programs. Other methods include having a good LinkedIn account so recruiters can find you, getting your foot in the door via another role, and then moving up as an internal candidate. Also, use of third parties such as employment service providers, educational institutions, staffing firms, so that you can get referrals, co-ops, or internships is not a bad idea. Since employers use several different methods for marketing positions, a job seeker should engage with those methods as well, or at the very least, find out which methods their company of choice or employer of choice is using. As for the iceberg analogy, I think it's okay to keep it so long as we are using it to discuss the importance of using different job search methods beyond job ads alone. We should definitely not be using it to talk about the 80% statistic, and we should honestly refrain from using statistics as hard and fast rules anyway, as they can change from year to year, from market to market, as we've seen with the Rochester data. Well, that is our video on the hidden origins of the hidden job market. My name is Jesse, and I'm an employment specialist. If you like today's video, give us a big thumbs up below and subscribe so you can catch our new videos on job search, since we have to replace our networking video based on old information. Never thought I would say that. Anyways, send us your questions and we'll catch you next time.